Okay, we are about ready to start the session. This is session 254, Managing Your Team's Deployment with Teams Admin Center. Our speaker today is Jamie Stark. So let's say welcome to Jamie and go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody who happens to be listening to me live, and hello everyone who is listening to the fantastic recording. My name is Jamie. I'm a program manager in the Microsoft Teams engineering organization, and I have the distinct pleasure of looking after the thing that we call Teams Admin Center. And so today we're going to spend the next 30 or so minutes very quickly walking through a lot of stuff about Teams Admin Center. First, before I start off, just want to say thanks to all the sponsors for making the show what it is. It's fantastic. It's great to see the community come together and to have a narrative around teams and collaboration. Even though we can't be together physically, at least we can be together virtually, and it's just fantastic. So thank you, everybody. So today we're gonna hit through a few different topics here. First, I'm going to just talk broadly about Teams Admin Center, what it is, what it's designed for, and then some of the kind of core sets of capabilities that we have within the product, really related around user configuration and policies and setting management. We actually have some cool new features in this area as well. So for those of you that may have heard me talk before about Teams Admin Center, I promise there's new stuff. Obviously, with Teams Admin Center, we are going to have a lot about the management of teams. So we're going to talk about a little bit of the Teams lifecycle, and then our last set of topics is going to be around voice. Don't know how much we'll be able to get done with respect to our enhancements around phone system and direct routing and dial plans and emergency calling, but there's a bunch there. And then we'll wrap it up with a little bit of hint as to what we're doing in the future. So the intent of Teams Admin Centers for IT pros that are responsible for the subscription of Microsoft Teams within a customer's Office 365 or M365 environment. They have one place to do all their work, and it's a really simple URL, admin.teams.microsoft.com. Now, of course, you do need to be an admin to go and visit that URL. If you go there as just somebody without and an AAD administrative creds, then you're going to see a vastly different experience, but we strip down. But for admins, you get a lot of great facility, and the intent is for this to be really powerful, really usable. So we think and we suffer a lot about the design, and we suffer a lot about ensuring that the capabilities that are present within Teams Admin Center are also present in other surface areas for IT pros. So we always want to ensure that you as admins have the facility to do what you need to do regardless of the tooling that you prefer. So if you like doing some stuff in PowerShell, that's all good. But we also want to ensure that the website is just as powerful and is just as responsive and has all the same transactional capabilities. And we're doing a lot to always bring in new features and new capabilities, and we do so on almost a bi-weekly basis. So we have currently releases every 2 weeks. It's not just bug fixes. We get new features out the door pretty much constantly. It's a single page app. We built it in React. We have tons and tons of testing and everything from end-to-end testing to specific unit tests to health checks that happen automatically. The whole site is responsive, meaning if I'm looking at it on a giant monitor, it's going to have one set of experiences. I'm looking at it on a small kind of tablet. It's still going to work. And even if I look at it on a mobile device, it's still the same site, but it will collapse menus and it will do things to where you can still have it be super usable. That usability is critical for us. We also spend a bunch of time on ensuring that the site is accessible. So not just that I can hit it from any web browser and I can hit it from any client, but I can also use assistive technologies like keyboard navigation and screen readers. And we also translate it into 40 different languages. I think though, one important thing for the practitioners out there, for the partners and folks that help customers with deployment, it's important to understand that every aspect of Teams Admin Center is customizable. And so we do this frequently. So if folks don't have certain licenses, we don't show certain capabilities. If folks are in an environment where those where some features are unavailable, then we intend not to show them on purpose. So folks don't get into a place where they're trying to access features that may be available in one environment but not in another. This is really common in the government space. So it's frequent that you'll find if you're used to the way the Teams Admin Center looks for your customer or for your deployment, and then you go and you look at someone else's Teams Admin Center, it may look very different, and that's why. So it's just important to understand that we are really responsive again to the licensing and to the different capabilities that people have turned on within their product. The way that it works, normally in my presentation here, I have a joke of like how it works that you can send to your boss. I've omitted that in this case here. This is actually our architecture. We're front-ended by 3 different deployments with Azure Front Door adjudicating between them. And so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll roll out features in a staged approach across Europe, Asia, and North America. So that way we can get a little bit of traffic onto a feature, make sure that the APIs that we're exposing are handling it well, make sure there's nothing unanticipated about the experience, and then we'll slowly kind of ramp that up. We're backed by a CDN to deliver the content. If that CDN goes down, then we have a backup for blob storage, and then there's I don't know about a dozen different backends that we talk to. The 2 most important though. First is PowerShell Web Services. So we actually directly call PowerShell from within the website, which is crazy and makes things interesting. But that is something that we're slowly moving away from. While it does keep us honest with respect to our principle of having equivalent capabilities across surface area, it is something that from a performance and usability perspective, we're looking forward to moving more and more of our experiences to config API. This currently is a private API. As we build it out and as it becomes more capable, we're certainly looking at what it means to have this be available publicly as well. But config API is where we're moving the majority of our transactions to go through, and it's much quicker. It's RESTful, and we're still gonna take PowerShell very seriously, I promise. So when we think about the different sets of capabilities that are available within Teams Admin Center, the first thing that we end up looking to talk about is user management. And it's important to note that we've intentionally thought about user management and brought some features out of Teams Admin Center because they are more appropriate to be in a place that looks across products or that looks across the subscription entirely. And so within the M365 Admin Center, you'll find the ability to spin up users, to assign them the appropriate licenses, to set the roles that they have, if they're admins, whether or not they can sign in or sign out. There's a little bit more there, but that's fundamentally the basics, because these sets of functions persist across the subscription. They persist across all the different products that you're going to take advantage of with M365, not just Teams. Whereas in Teams Admin Center, we're focused on the specific capabilities that are enabled by Teams. So for example, being able to dial into a conference, being able to have sophisticated voice capabilities, managing policies, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then any Teams relevant information about the user. So for example, what their Teams upgrade setting is, and things like that. And so there is a lot of user management facility within Teams Admin Center. Here's a screenshot of that for expediency's sake. I'm not going to be dropping in and out of a client like I normally do in my presentations. We're going to have a set of screenshots here, but of course, if there's anything that goes sideways or anything that you're curious to know more about, don't hesitate to ask questions. We can either take them here or we could take them in the breakout session that we have planned after, provided, of course, you are listening to us live. Yes, these phone numbers are phone numbers that are on here. One of them is my personal phone number. One of them is fake. So please don't abuse that. But regardless, here is the user detail page. You can see Amos's contact information. You can see if they were having phone calls. the 7-day quality and 7-day activity. You can see that kind of bubbled up there at the top. And then the tabs below that show account, voice, call history, and policy. So the account information, just about what's happening with respect to their team's information in their account. In this case, audio conferencing, some info about Teams Upgrade. Their voice capability would show like group call pickup and shared line appearance, whether or not we would let them dial domestic or international calls. Their entire call history as a jumping off point to be able to look at the analytics on those calls, and then of course policies. Policies are a tremendously important part of the whole team's management experience, and so because of that, I'm going to talk about a little bit of nomenclature, and it can be confusing because it's really easy to have these words be used interchangeably when we do mean them specifically. A policy will have a collection of configuration elements that are all aligned around a given workload or a modality. So you're going to have everything that deals with messaging should show up in messaging policy, and everything that deals with meetings should show up in meeting policy. And the thing that's unique about about policies is that they can be applied not just at the tenant level, but they can also be applied to each individual user. So for example, you could say that engineer Jamie, he should not have the ability to use Giphies. And so you can create Giphies. You can create a policy. You can have that policy configured the right way, assign that to that single user, and then that's their experience from that point forward. It's incredibly powerful. Obviously, you can also have that type of configuration for the whole tenant. So if you have some capability, you just want to turn off for the whole tenant, no worries. You can just do that in one step. And then now, we'll talk about this in a little bit, also being able to support per group policies. So kind of in between from a granularity perspective. So instead of the entire tenant, now we can just look at a single group of users as well. Settings, on the other hand, while they are also elements of configuration, and we work hard to ensure that they're grouped by modality to where it's rational. So all the guest stuff is in one place, all the audio conferencing stuff is one place. Really, this is a per tenant thing. And now we may have multiple instances. So I may have settings that are for a given set of conference bridges or for a given set of voice applications, things like that. So I can go to a conference bridge and I can change the order of the way that that it answers the phone with respect to languages. I can change around the language order, things like that. I can change around the configuration of the voice app. But really, settings are really a per tenant level configuration. And it may seem a little arbitrary about why we say, hey, this thing is per tenant and this thing is per user. But there is a bunch of thought that goes into that. The most important piece of this is that if there are capabilities that today we only offer at a per tenant level, and you think that there's utility in having that operate at a per user level, it's super important to hear about it. Now, it may not be something that we can take on, right? It may be that the protocol just doesn't allow that to happen. In a lot of the really squirrely kind of SIP and SDP traffic management situation, we get into some of that, where like a mismatch of two different user agents wouldn't work. It could be crazy out of our norms to do that from a practical perspective, meaning this would be like the one case within the IT Pro experience of Teams where you can do something at a per user level, but in every other case, it's not. Sometimes the customer experience is better. There is a level of complexity that is added with policy. Now, we think that that's useful and important because that configuration is necessary. But it may certainly be that that the customer experience may be improved in one way or another, or it just could be temporal. It could be that we've got a stack rank of work and something else came first. But regardless, again, it's really important to hear from everybody and to hear what will help your business take on Teams either to a greater extent or to a greater depth. And we know that the IT Pro set of facility is super important for that. And so anytime you have feedback on that. We'd love to hear it. Just a quick roundup of what we have with kind of in the box with respect to policies. I've broken this up into two different slides. Kind of first, when I think about teams and channels and that whole experience, we think about the ability to manage apps. Apps end up being really sophisticated, and so we have a set of policy that deals with the way that apps show up on the client. I like to say we think about the expression of the application on the client. It's the app setup policy. Permission policy deals with how I, as a user, have access to apps, whether or not that app is even something that I could see in my store or that I could even have available to me. So the availability of applications across first party Microsoft applications, second party applications that are created by you in the organization, third party coming from outside the organization. You have the ability to manage each of those uniquely. So if you never want to see OneNote, you can have OneNote disappear forever. Maybe not completely, but certainly without permission policy. There's no sacred cows here. You have a lot of control. Messaging policy, super popular. Lots of controls around the way that users interact with the messaging interface, including our ever popular Giphies or Jiffies, memes, stickers, all that sort of stuff. All the fun things. You could turn all that off. Certainly don't recommend that. Teams and channels policy is a little thin. Governing private channel creation. Private team discovery is something that's available only in preview right now. And then being able to upgrade, obviously, from Skype for Business to Teams, managed through the Teams upgrade policy. And just Teams upgrade policy deals with the manner in which, if I have multiple clients and I'm joining meetings or I'm chatting with people, how that's supposed to operate. Cross calling and meetings, there is a lot of policy. Obviously, for live events like this one, we want to have some control around whether or not live events can be transcribed and recorded, whether or not even folks have the facility to schedule them. There's a tremendous amount of richness in the meetings policy we're super proud of. Clearly, there's just a lot of capability there and a lot of reasons for customers to choose to have some of that throttled or turned off depending upon the types of scenarios. And so there's a lot of richness in meeting policy. For voice, it's a great testament to the level of complexity and the level of sophistication that's available within the product. That complexity isn't something that you have to take on. That'll be the first thing that I'll touch on. You don't have to have really sophisticated dial plans or really sophisticated voice routing necessarily, but if you have those requirements, you certainly can have that level of sophistication implemented in what we have in the voice stack. So everything from just kind of the straight up calling policy, which really deals with the manner in which end users interact with the calling features, to call park, which is literally just deals with call park. Calling line ID, whether or not that's blocked for inbound or outbound, and how to replace that if you're looking to do a substitution. Dial plans, we'll talk about those a little bit more later, along with the emergency calling policies as well. But there's a lot there that you have an opportunity to configure and to manage in order to have the appropriate calling experience with Teams. A couple of new things that we have coming along with respect to policy. So first, I talked real briefly about how policies are a level of complexity, that there's that there is work in order to think about a policy and how I want to have that configured. We understand that that can, in some cases, slow down folks' deployment because they want to think about and they want to evaluate the different choices and make sure that they're starting off on the right foot. Make sure that they're making the right choices initially in their deployment, and so that way they don't give something to a set of end users and then have to take it back later when they realize that policy may not be appropriate. And so what we've done is we've collected a group of policies together and thought about specific use cases. So healthcare or frontline workers, scenarios like that. And then provided a way to make it really easy to apply not just a single policy, but a whole collection of policies, and to have that be applied to specific users. So you can imagine a scenario, and a lot of analysts talk about this, of having your user base split up into cohorts of different profiles, and then have that profile of user, that once you understand their communications needs, then you would assign them the appropriate package of policies. Today, these are cooked, but we do have work on the books to be able to expand these to not only include the policies that we have here, but also to have new policies, to be able to new packages that could be created. So today, all the policy packages are all canned and are all canned and are all provided by default by Microsoft. But in the future, you'll be able to not only expand the types of policies, but also create new policy packages as well.
Jamie.
Yeah.
We have a question from S. Day. If the admin portal is meant to do everything you can in PowerShell, are we expecting to see bulk user management, for example, setting a meeting policy for multiple users at once or a group in the future?
Oh, look at that. We didn't even have this planned. So Therese, the question that you asked was around how we allow for folks to have large quantities of users assigned policy. And it's true, until very recently, policy assignment was limited to just about 20 users. So what you could do is you could say, like, for these 20 users, I could assign them, 9 different policy instances. But you still are limited to about 20. And fundamentally, that was just the facility that the API had. And then, of course, if you imagine, because this is all being, going through PowerShell, there's limits at kind of every stage of the pipeline through there. Now, though, we have a fantastic set of capabilities that we've wired up, where we're supporting large cohorts of users. Group is next, group is there. But fundamentally, this is now an asynchronous activity. Because the idea is, if I'm going to submit a request for 20 users, generally the system can pull that off and just say, "Yep, we've got it, we're good." 20,000 users, on the other hand, that's a lot, and the system's not going to be able to even adjudicate whether or not 20,000 users are valid or active. So what happens is, once you go over 20 users, instead of saying, "Yep, we did it," we'll say, "Yep, we've queued this work." And then what we'll see is a link at the top of the page saying, "Hey, we're ready to accept we're ready to provide you status on your assignment." And then you can go into a new feature called the activity log that shows the status of that policy assignment. Now, if you just assign a single policy type, you'll see a single line item in the activity log. But if you take 5,000 users and you assign them a calling policy, a messaging policy, and a meeting policy, you'll see 3 rows there. You'll see one for each policy type, and that's just for the way that the kind of backend system processes the work. And the way that this looks like, so this is the detail page for the activity log. So what happens is, I'm on the dashboard and I click on the activity log and I see the list of all the activities. Or when I do a policy transaction and I get the link that says, "Okay, we've queued it," and you can look at status here. Then I go into this page, and this page tells me when the transaction was submitted. So I was working on my deck yesterday, and I did this transaction. It took about, it looks like, a little under 2 minutes, a minute and a half or so for this. So 17, so 2.5 minutes for this transaction to complete. This is 95 users. Don't scale the transaction time into users. It's not like that. Just who knows what else is happening at the in this goofy demo tenant that we have and the infrastructure behind it. So, and the stuff I've found has actually been really fast. And what's nice about this is that I can see then each individual record, and I can see what the status is. So there may be a case where a user isn't licensed for a feature, and that would error out. So you would see that, oh, instead of 95 completed, I may see 94 completed and 1 error, as an example. So yeah, we're really excited about having this capability. This scales very high. Right now, I think the kind of bigger issue you'll have is is enumerating all of those users to be able to pass in there. But what I did to do that example is we've got a couple hundred users or whatever that have Skype in the name. So I just searched for Skype, selected all of them, and gave them a new live events policy or something. And so yeah, it's super cool. The other big work that we have going on in policy today, this is available in a private preview for PowerShell, but we're doing the work right now in Teams Admin Center. So this isn't live yet, but this is something that we've talked about in the past and that we're still working on. I don't have a good time frame yet on when this will land, and certainly it's going to land in kind of a TAP or a private preview first. So just expect it this calendar year, but it may be toward the end of the quarter. It may be the beginning of the next quarter, somewhere in there. So I didn't want to guess too rigorously and then have it slip. So it's definitely going to be this year though. And if you're in any of our early adopter programs, you'll certainly see it. But being able to assign policies to groups, you can use a modern group or an OU or a security group. We don't currently have nested group support, so it may make sense to create new groups just for the purposes of policy assignment. And the way this works is that the policies are assigned to groups and then propagate out to each of the members. What's interesting is that the prioritization across the group is what is used to determine priority, right? And so it may seem a little weird. But as you start to work with it, it makes sense. So here's an example of the UX. So what you'll see here is I'm in calling policies, and I can see I'm going to have a new tab here under this group policy assignment, and I have 2 groups here, one called sales and marketing and one called marketing. So imagine I in my previous life as a marketer, I happen to be in both of these groups. The reason that we have these ordered is that if I'm in both of these groups and these groups have assigned different policies, and you'll see that they do here, the sales and marketing group is allow calling, the marketing group is disallow calling. So if I'm in this single group, then it's not deterministic. So what do? We got to have some way to break this tie, right? I'm a member of both of these groups, and these groups have 2 different policies. Policies have to be deterministic. I have to know who, as a user, what policy am I getting? Am I getting one that's specifically assigned to me, one that's coming from a group, or one that's coming from the tenant? So this is how we resolve whether or not it's coming from the group or not, of what rank we're giving it. So because this group is rank 1, I will be allowed calling, whereas all of my poor colleagues in marketing will not be allowed calling. And so yeah, this is currently available, again, private preview for PowerShell. The documentation is posted on. If you're interested, you can read about it there. And then we're actively working on, as you can imagine, across 11 different policies, there's a bunch of work to be able to add in this experience across all those different policy types. Kind of switching off to Teams lifecycle. Teams lifecycle allows me as an IT pro to be able to not only enumerate all of the teams in a tenant, but also be able to do operations on them. So I can delete them, I can archive them, I can edit their properties. I can get in there and I can change around my users. I could change whether or not a user is a owner of the team, or if they're just a member of the team. And very much brand new, the new information protection sensitivity labels that recently went out to GA, and we are also now supporting that within Teams Lifecycle. So if you're using the new IP sensitivity labels, you'll actually see those showing up within your Teams Lifecycle experience now. I also have a bunch of channel management, including support for private channels. And then I can see all sorts of membership data across my teams. And so I can see, how many channels I've got my teams, how many private channels, how many members, that sort of thing. There's a good amount of settings that are available for the team. So whether or not team members can edit and delete messages, managing my connectors, being able to add and edit channels, and then also, now that we have private channels, we also have the ability to manage the private channel roster. So being able to change who's showing up in that private channel and be able to manage that as needed. So another kind of great set of capability that's new with the private channel support. So for example, here where I'm adding a member to a private channel, obviously I can't add any member of the tenant. I have to add a member from this team in order to have them show up into the private channel. So now we're going to transition into some voice capability. The voice capability has grown by leaps and bounds, and there's a tremendous amount here. So the first piece is that for managing telephone numbers. So if you subscribe to the phone system SKU and the calling plans, then you have the ability to port in your phone numbers into M365 and using Teams, or you can do a search and you can acquire new phone numbers directly from within Teams Admin Center. Those numbers then have the ability to be assigned to end users, be able to be assigned to resource accounts for use within auto attendants and call queues and other applications. And all the management of emergency addresses and locations is also included in here. And then one of the fun things that we got as a result of the work with our colleagues who run the back end over this is being able to have a view of all of the orders that are being made within the system. So anytime you make an order for phone numbers, whether that's an acquisition order or a port order, you'll see the status on that directly within Teams Admin Center. Porting phone numbers obviously is a little bit more complicated than just acquiring them into your tenant, because it requires us to work with our carrier partners to be able to manage that port on your behalf. That involves a fairly significant legal process. And so while we can automate that for some regions, and we're actively working to expand that automation, today that's almost exclusively available for just U.S. phone numbers. Most U.S. phone numbers. There's some cases where we can't handle porting, but for the most part, if you have U.S.-based phone numbers, we should be able to automate your port. In cases where we can't, then we have a service desk, and that service desk you can either engage with directly, or you can engage with through Teams Admin Center. So you can create a porting request. If it's for the UK, Canada, or the US, you create that porting request directly from within Teams Admin Center. If we can automate the port, we will. If we can't, then that port goes into the service desk, and then they'll manage it from that point forward. We're going to add in additional regions over time, but for the time being, outside US, UK, and Canada, which I know is most of the world, we're still using the manual service desk. Those slowly over time we'll have those additional regions be supported. But in the meantime, the other way to be able to plumb in PSTN services into Teams, in addition to using calling plans, is to use direct routing. And with direct routing, you have the facility to have your own circuits and your own plan and your own carrier be connected into M365 through the use of a session border controller. And so this is connecting your on-premises circuits with M365. There's two experiences there. There's a dashboard experience that we've had for a little while that kind of details the state of the session border controllers that exist on your premises. And then we have a set of configuration. And that configuration was in the past done with PowerShell. now is completely done within, and now can be completely done within Teams Admin Center. So that includes defining the session border controller, setting up all the different complexity of the trunks, creating voice routes to be able to match the normalized phone number that somebody is dialing with different egress points, and then being able to manage the PSTN usages. So PSTN usages showing up in a policy that's assigned to the user, PSTN usages also showing up to the voice route. And that's how that matching is how calls end up being egressed through Teams. And so the way that this looks, here's a detail page of a given session border controller. This is against our little test tenant, so this isn't working or taking active calls. But you can see some of the usage information up top, and then the different settings for this particular session border controller. And then if I need to, I can go in, edit those settings, take the SBC online, change signaling, be able to configure location-based routing or dynamic key 911, that sort of thing. There's a lot of sophistication in the in what you can do with direct routing, and that we look to have that exposed for everybody to take advantage of. Dial plans are pretty important for larger organizations. Again, for smaller organizations, this may not be something that you need to take on. It really comes down to the manner in which end users dial their phone numbers. And so in a lot of cases, end users are trained to dial in a particular fashion. So we want to be able to support that. So their dialing behavior ends up converting into E164. And then from there, I can determine whether or not they're authorized to make that call. I can determine whether or not, or how that call gets routed as it egresses the system. So each dial plan that you create ends up having a couple settings, and then a set of normalization rules that you create. And the normalization rule basically just says, hey, if I get a number that looks like this, I need to convert it into something different. And that could be fairly sophisticated, because the normalization rules are regular expressions, and you can see that in this advanced view of the dialing rule. Clearly, if you're using Lasco's tool to be able to do dial plans and to be able to do some sophisticated regex, it's great. You can just dump that in here. You can also use a more basic variant where you just kind of choose the mode based off of a drop down, and that's what I did. So this was if I dial 4 digits, I'm gonna take off that first digit, replace it with a 7, and then go from there. And what's kind of cool is that right from within this experience, I can test this individual rule, and then once I have the entire dial plan set up, then I can test the entire dial plan as well. So we really do look to have the website be really helpful, and especially in cases where the stuff is sophisticated, and there is a lot of depth in what you can do. So we wanted to be able to make it straightforward for people to be able to use this pretty powerful set of tooling. For dynamic emergency calling, this is a new set of capability that recently came out in the voice stack. Now we have the ability to configure that end to end within Teams Admin Center. Fundamentally, it allows an end user's location object to be sent to emergency services along with the call. Now, to have that be dynamic means that I actually have to have some understanding of where the end user's endpoint's located. And so that first requires the IT pro to be able to define the organization's network topology, and then have that linked to the emergency address, some physical location. And so then based off of what Teams sees in the network, then we can say, oh, well, based off of this network topology, I know that I'm located here. And so there's two different sets of configuration that's available here, or that's necessary here. One is around setting up the emergency policies, and then one is setting up the emergency locations, and just the way that the network topology maps to each of those. And then the two policies that I skipped over earlier, are relevant here. Emergency calling to be able to deal with the way that folks are notified within your organization. So if you have a security desk, does that security desk get a phone call, or do they get a Teams chat? And then where, like, where's the security desk? How can we reach that endpoint? And then the call routing policy, that more deals with the dial string, like what actually people are going to be dialing, and then mapping that to a PSTN usage, so that way it can be routed out. So first, from kind of the networks and locations perspective, here I can define at a bunch of different levels of granularity, right? So generally a subnet in a corporate environment isn't going to span a whole building, but it may span a floor, it may span a couple floors. Wi-Fi access point, a little bit more granular, whereas a switch off of a port, that could lead directly to somebody's endpoint. So you can have these different levels of granularity, and frankly, different customers have different requirements on this, either from their own kind of looking at what they need to implement, or looking at their at the appropriate local regulatory authority that manages the requirements for emergency services. That you may find you need to have this stuff be granular to a more finer degree than just subnet. So we have a lot of availability there. Each of these point to an emergency location, and then here's an example of the network topology. So here I've set up all of the subnets that define the office and shoreline, and then from there, what emergency calling and emergency call routing policy will be used for this particular network definition. So again, fairly sophisticated work, but allows for a lot of configurability and a lot of different scenarios for using dynamic emergency calling.
Jamie, I'm just going to give you a 3-minute warning.
Perfect. Last but not least, there's a tremendous amount of work that's been going on in voice applications. The auto attendant, an automated service to be able to hear prompts and be able to accept user input over speech or DTMF. That has a bunch of new features that have come in around, like transferring to voicemail and being able to use PSTN endpoints for the auto attendant. Holidays are able to be configured, so you can have different treatments for callers depending upon your holiday configuration. Call queues allow for agents to be able to be waiting for users who come in through a queue after they've been waiting on hold and hear music. Then they can be transferred to an agent. And then finally, resource accounts are the fundamental infrastructure that powers the auto attendants and the call queues, such that you can apply policy and you can manage these objects appropriately within the environment. And then I'm just going to leave it here. There's a ton more capabilities that are coming into auto attendant call queue, and more configuration that's in direct routing. I talked about the countries for phone number porting and acquisition. Those are going to be growing over time. More policy packages, I'd mentioned that as well. In addition to the ones that are static, we were looking to have additional policy types to be in the package, to see those policy packages be able to be customized and be able to create them from scratch. Bunch of work that's happened in Teams lifecycle. You actually haven't been out there in a little bit. You'll notice new parameters, or I'm sorry, new columns in the summary table. You'll notice a new widget. There's just a lot of good work that's happening around Teams lifecycle right now. Policy assignment to groups happening this year. And then broadly from the entire product, we're actively working for enhancing the interfaces that we have to the backend systems. So instead of going through PowerShell, to have those going through Config API, to be able to have a more performant, more reliable set of interfaces to be able to give you the best experience possible at Teams Admin Center. And so with that, really appreciate you hanging out for the balance of the last 45 minutes. Thank you so much for coming out to Commsverse. Hope that the next instance that we have to get together, we have an opportunity to do so physically. But until then, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
And we'd like to remind everyone there's a link in the chat window. You can join Jamie for post-session networking, and he'll be there probably in about a minute or two. So thank you for joining us today.